So, good morning, students. Today's class is about respiratory system introduction, and so here I am going to cover brief anatomy and mainly important functions what our respiratory system is doing here. Okay. So, what are the main functions of respiratory system as a whole is it provides oxygen, removes carbon dioxide. In addition to that, it will regulate the pH just like along with kidneys. Phonation means speech. It will also help in speech mechanism and defense against microbes. So from nose to alveoli, we have so many protective mechanisms which will keep us in a healthy condition. Okay, influences arterial concentration of chemical messengers by removing them from pulmonary capillary, producing and adding others to this blood. So something like example, small blood clots will be arising here and will be trapped in the pulmonary capillaries. It will remove it from there and it keeps it in a clear condition. So main function of respiration we'll see in the next topics. So what is respiratory apparatus includes is we start breathing from nose. So through trachea, it will enters into both the lungs. Mainly oxygen will enter and diffuse from alveoli into the blood circulation. So from lungs to blood means oxygen will be diffused, and in the blood how it is transported from lungs to the tissues. We study under the heading as oxygen transport. Once oxygen reaches the tissues, the waste material due to metabolic actions what is produced around the tissues and inside the tissues is carbon dioxide. So whenever oxygen is diffusing into the tissues, simultaneously carbon dioxide diffuses out of cells into the blood circulation, and once it joins we call it as venous blood or deoxygenated blood, but it includes both carbon dioxide and oxygen also. Okay, so from carbon dioxide transported from tissues to the lungs, from there to the exterior into the environment. So this mechanism is called as carbon dioxide transport. We have to study under subheading. So here respiratory process includes pulmonary ventilation, also called mechanism of ventilation, which again contains nearer to external respiration, where diffusion of gases between the lungs and the blood circulation, gas transport in the form of oxygen and carbon dioxide we have to study, and how this respiration takes place in a rhythmic and regular fashion is mainly depends upon the brain connection centers located mainly in the medulla and pons. So we call it as regulation of respiration, which includes neural regulation and chemical regulation. What is internal respiration is nothing but oxygen reaching the tissues and diffusing from blood into the tissues. So these are the main subheadings we have to study, which includes again many subheadings here. So what is external respiration? Ventilation, keeping fresh air in the alveoli, and from alveoli by gas exchange moving into the blood, from there transport to and from the tissues, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide transport. Internal respiration means again an exchange of gases from blood to the tissues. So in cellular respiration, how oxygen is used and production of carbon dioxide by cells in order to transfer energy to ATP. During that process, carbon dioxide is released. And mainly overall regulation of respiration we have to study here. So this is mainly how oxygen is transported from external environment into the lungs, from lungs into the blood circulation, from there into the tissues, from tissues to in return is carbon dioxide, how it will go into the right side of the heart from right atrium, right ventricle through pulmonary arteries, it will go into the lungs and again expired out in exchange of oxygen here. So this is all the process here. We call it as external respiration, and when the purified blood goes to the tissues, we call it as internal respiration. In between you have oxygen transport and carbon dioxide transport. So how beautifully the lungs will expand smoothly, and we study under the pulmonary ventilation. And this the down video shows that how the oxygen is diffusing into the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses out here. So this is how the smooth expansion and recoiling of the lungs takes place. During this process, the air will enter into and air will expire out. So how air will enter into the lungs is mainly depends upon the pressure gradient of gases here, and how much components are present or content concentration of gases at different levels. So if you see the table below, you can see partial pressure of oxygen. We express these as we have many gases in combination in the air. We express them as partial pressures. So mainly we need only these two gases, so we concentrate on its values here. The partial pressure of oxygen in millimeters of mercury in the air is 149 millimeters of mercury. When it enters into the lungs, the air present in the oxygen partial pressure is around 100 to 101 millimeters of mercury, and in the blood it is 95, tissues is around 36 millimeters of mercury. So you can see here there is a pressure gradient from atmospheric air, lungs, blood, tissues. There is a, because of difference in this partial pressure, the air oxygen will enter very easily from external environment into lungs during inspiration, from lungs to the blood by diffusion, from blood to tissues by transportation, and in near tissues it will again diffuse into the tissues, oxygen supply. In exchange carbon dioxide. If you see the carbon dioxide values, partial pressures 46 millimeters of mercury near the tissues, which is the highest concentration. Venous blood, which is coming towards the tissues because of release of oxygen, 40 millimeters of mercury, carbon dioxide, PCO2 will be there. So there is a pressure gradient of 6 millimeters of mercury, which will cause diffusion of carbon dioxide from tissues into the blood, from blood into the lungs. What is the difference is only 1 millimeter of mercury. This will help in carbon dioxide release from blood into the lungs, and from lungs into the atmosphere. You can see the concentration gradient is so much different. Approximately 39 millimeters or 38 millimeters of mercury pressure gradient, which will make the carbon dioxide diffuse out very easily during expiration process. So external respiration means gas exchange in the lungs from alveoli into the blood circulation. You can see here every alveolus has got a basket of network of capillaries, so that the oxygen will diffuse very easily, and carbon dioxide need not be whole of blood is oxygenated. Very less amount of oxygen also can be diffused and saturate the hemoglobin passing through the capillaries. So this is brief anatomy you can see here. So if you see diffusion of gases from atmosphere into the alveoli, from alveoli into the blood circulation diffusion into the tissues, and transport of carbon dioxide here. So this is how oxygen or air entering into the alveolus. You can see here alveolus side. From there it has to diffuse through different layers of alveolo-capillary membrane. It is also called respiratory membrane, where diffusion of oxygen takes place in this direction. So it has to pass through these layers, then into the plasma, from there into the RBC, because hemoglobin is the one which is carrying oxygen here. So from RBC and plasma, some amount of carbon dioxide diffuses back into the alveolus, from there into the environment. So here we have to study what is the structure of respiratory membrane thickness and what are the layers. forms the respiratory membrane here. So this is about external respiration, this is about internal respiration, this is about transport of oxygen, this is about the transport of carbon dioxide here. So this is how the oxygen animation showing oxygen is diffusing back, simultaneously carbon dioxide is released here. So oxygen and carbon dioxide transport in separate classes we are going to explain in detail individual classes here. So here briefly the anatomy, if you see how the trachea divides into two bronchi, right bronchi into the right lung and left bronchi into the left lung. Some more anatomy and its relations, blood supply, lymphatic supply, everything is dealt in anatomy in detail. So here we go for physiological anatomy here. So the smoothly expanding lungs or recoiling lungs should be without any obstruction. They should be smoothly recoiling and expanding here. So for this purpose, where they are located is inside a thoracic bony cage. So what is briefly structure of thoracic cage? What are the components and how thoracic cage has to expand simultaneously along with the lungs to provide space for the expanding lungs, and also the thoracic cage should recoil back to press the lungs when they are doing expiration here. So both will have a stretchable capacity called as compliance or stretchability. So what are the structures which helps in compliance or stretchability of thoracic cage? What are the factors which helps in smooth expansion and recoiling of lungs? We have to study under compliance, which is again part of mechanism of breathing. So which will be one of the important, which is also called as pulmonary ventilation, which is an essay. So we should prepare for that also. So what are the thoracic cage in addition to its own bony components? Its bony components are sternum, ribs, 12 pairs of ribs and different size and diameter of ribs, and what is their cartilage positions. Here you can see, and when we remove the rib cage, it is occupied by the soft expanding tissue here. But how this thoracic cage is mainly expanding and recoiling depends upon the intercostal muscles, the muscles which are connected between the two ribs here. External intercostal and internal intercostal muscles helps in the smooth expansion of thoracic cage in three directions, three diameters we call it as. From side to side we call it as transverse diameter, from above downwards called as vertical diameter, from front to back is called as antero-posterior diameter here. So the lungs are covered by two types of thin layers called, if you just cut and remove shown here, outer one is called parietal pleura, and again lung is tightly covered by another layer called visceral pleura. Okay, in between these two we have a thin space called pleural cavity, which is filled with thin film of pleural fluid. What is the purpose of fluid? Is to prevent the friction when the lungs are expanding and recoiling here. So this is about the lung, bronchi, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles. We have got so many branching, just like a tree branching. And finally they will lead into terminally bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles leads into alveolar duct into the alveolar here. So here you can see a branching of the names given here. Actually this is called as Weibel's classification. What is the number of branching bronchi and two bronchioles is there here. So upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract we divide for the purpose of studying any infections, upper respiratory tract infection, lower respiratory tract infections here. So just above thoracic chest cavity is called upper respiratory, from nose to the trachea. Lower respiratory tract from bronchi to terminal bronchi and alveoli. So this is briefly about the nose. What are different parts of the nose? And what is the main function of nose is epithelium for sense of smell, and it will warm the air when it is entering into, because from outside environment to our body, when it is entering, it should be similar to our body temperature. So it will humidify it, moistens there, so that diffusion is easier. And these are some of the functions, and you can see inside the nose and upper part of trachea we have got a ciliated columnar epithelium and covered by a little sticky mucus. This will help in, these are produced by specialized goblet cells. So this mucus layer and cilia, these projections will help in any foreign body will be sticking here and goes in upward direction here. That is called as escalator mechanism. So this is how foreign body is moved upwards towards the nose from the trachea and bronchi here. So what is purpose of respiratory tract and mainly nose and upper respiratory is they clean the inspired air through their mucus and cilia, warm and moisten the air so that diffusion will be possible easily. Mucosa warmer than the other tissues helps in the olfaction also. And other pathways like trachea, bronchi helps in conduction of air, and also speech. Larynx and vocal cords are present in the junction of larynx and trachea. So phonation is one of the main process which is, along with the during process of expiration we do this one. So next part is pharynx. So what are the parts, and it mainly pharynx helps in covered by epiglottis, so that pharynx helps in passage of air through both the direction. That is front part we have larynx and back side is esophagus. So when we are swallowing food, the epiglottis will close the upper part of the larynx and prevents entry of food into the larynx and preventing choking, which is a complicated process here. So this is briefly about the anatomy of the nose, pharynx and larynx here. You can see from larynx to upper last part of the terminal bronchiole, we call it as conductive zone or conducting air zone only, which does not participate in the exchange of gases here. So you can see here Weibel's classification, which helps in the branching of this one. So finally, this is the voice production, vocal cords, how they produce the sound, and the alveoli, which are covered by a thin layer of this one. So next class we'll see the respiratory membrane, how it helps in the diffusion here.